All right, today we're diving into something that's both deeply personal and totally universal, the spiritual path. We're going to look at what really happens during those first huge, mind-altering breakthroughs and how they can completely flip your view of reality on its head. So let's get into it. This quote from Pema Chodron, man, it just hits you, right? It really sets the stage perfectly. It's all about the guts it takes to just start looking inward, to face whatever is there with honesty, but also with kindness. Because that's the thing. When you really do start looking, when you begin to investigate who you are, what you find might be the last thing you'd ever expect. It might even feel completely impossible. I mean, just think about that for a second. It's a pretty wild question, isn't it? And we're not talking about this as some kind of philosophical riddle. We're talking about a direct, felt experience. And that is the core paradox we're going to unpack. The person whose experience we're drawing from describes this breakthrough not as some complicated idea, but as this sudden, overwhelming feeling, a moment of just absolute certainty that the I we all assume is there just isn't. Not in the way we think, anyway. And this wasn't some kind of crazy psychedelic vision or dream. The source is really clear on this. It was just a simple, quiet, but utterly certain realization, the kind that changes everything in an instant. So you're probably wondering, how on earth does something like that even happen? Well, it turns out it's not totally random. According to schools of thought like Buddhism, there are actually specific insights that can act like gateways to this kind of awakening. Let's take a look. These are often called the three universal truths. You know, having a deep, profound insight into any one of these can be the trigger. It could be really seeing that nothing has a solid, separate existence. That's emptiness. Or that everything is constantly changing. That's impermanence. Or even just getting the inherent stress of it all. That's suffering. And when that breakthrough happens, there's actually a name for it, Sotapanna. It literally means stream enterer. It's the term for someone who has had that first direct glimpse of how things really are. And because of that, they've entered the stream that leads irreversibly toward full awakening. Now, I know what you might be thinking. An experience this profound must require, decades of silent meditation on some remote mountaintop. But here's the surprising part. Our source suggests the real engine for this insight is actually way more accessible than we've been led to believe. This slide just illustrates it perfectly. On the right, you have that formal, super-focused, mastery-level meditation. But look at the left side, fleeting jhana. You've experienced this. It's when you're so lost in music or a book or even a show that for a few moments, you completely disappear. And here's the kicker, that can be enough. And here it is, straight from the source. It wasn't about forcing some rigid, formal practice. It was about letting the mind get deeply absorbed in everyday things, which means the potential for this kind of insight is woven right into our normal lives. But before any of these insights can really land and stick, there's a really important prerequisite, one that a lot of people skip over. You gotta have a solid foundation to build on. Honestly, it doesn't matter which specific tradition it comes from. What matters is a genuine commitment to living ethically, a deep-down feeling that you want to do the right thing and resist temptation. This moral compass is what makes the mind stable enough for these profound insights to actually take root. So, what happens after that lightning strike moment of insight? Well, it's not always a peaceful walk in the park. The aftermath can actually be a pretty confusing and intense time of trying to make sense of this new reality. This table lays it out so well. Mentally, your world is upside down, and the best way to handle that is with calm, rational observation. Socially, yeah, good luck explaining this to most people, so sometimes just being quiet about it is the wisest move. And spiritually, you've got to watch out for the ego trying to turn this into a big deal, which is why you just humbly go back to the practice. It's all about stabilizing. Now, after that integration period, which can seriously take years, the path continues. The next stage is called Sakadagami, or once returner. This isn't about another dramatic flash of insight, but more of a gradual weakening of your old attachments and aversions. You just find yourself much more committed to the path. So as we start to wrap this up, it's really important to remember this. While the journey itself is intensely personal, the principles behind it are universal. There are clear signs that you can look for to know you're headed in the right direction. So, what do you look for? Well, stuff like finding your commitment to practice is growing naturally. Noticing that old cravings or things that used to annoy you don't have the same grip. Your mind just feels more stable. And, most importantly, you see these insights actually changing how you show up in your day-to-day life. And this right here is the biggest takeaway. The path unfolds differently for everyone. Progress isn't about white-knuckling it or following a strict formula. It comes from being genuinely curious, living a good life, and just being open to seeing things exactly as they are. So, we'll leave you with this to think about. In your own life, your own journey, how do you find that balance, that sweet spot between putting in the effort and just letting things unfold? It's a question that lies right at the heart of this entire path. Okay, so let's just start with a huge question. Who are you? I mean, really? It's so fundamental, right? We kind of just go through our lives assuming there's this solid, stable me at the center of everything. Well, today we're going to explore a pretty radical idea from Eastern philosophy that challenges that whole foundation. What if that feeling of I, the one you think of as you, isn't some permanent thing at all? What if it's something else entirely? Something more like a process than a thing? That's the core question we're really going to unpack here. And man, this quote from Shunryu Suzuki just nails it. It gives us the perfect metaphor. The self isn't the door itself, it's the motion, the swinging. It's a constant activity. And this idea is basically our entry point into the Buddhist concept of anatta, or no self. Now, getting this isn't just some philosophical party trick. According to Buddhist teachings, this isn't a random aha moment. Nope. It's a very specific stage of insight on a well-documented path. So let's explore what that stage is called and what it really means. The term is sakadagami. This is that moment of profound realization where it just clicks. The self you've always identified with is, well, a concept, a label your mind created. Now, it's not the end of the journey, not by a long shot, but it gives you a totally new map and a much clearer direction. But here's the really crucial part. This isn't like flipping a switch. The source material is very clear that even after you know the self as a construct, it can take years for all your thoughts, your feelings, your habits to catch up and fully settle into this new reality. It's a gradual thing. So how in the world do you even begin to approach an insight like this? The good news is there isn't just one rigid path. There are actually different approaches for different kinds of minds. The two main paths are samatha and vipassana. Samatha is all about tranquility meditation, the disciplined practice of calming the mind to create a peaceful, quiet space for insight to arise. But the second path, vipassana, is really interesting here. It's more of a constant examination of reality, and the source we're looking at suggests this is often a much better fit for the restless, analytical modern mind. And this leads to a pretty fascinating idea. What if that tendency we all have to constantly analyze, to question, to overthink, the thing we usually call a problem, could actually be harnessed? Could it be that all that restless mental energy, if you just point it in the right direction, is actually a raw form of vipassana, of insight meditation, just in disguise? But as that old familiar sense of I starts to weaken, a whole new set of challenges can show up. It can be a really disorienting process. And the mind will desperately, and I mean desperately, try to find something new to cling to. This image really captures that transitional chaos perfectly. As the old structure of yourself starts to break apart, it leaves a vacuum. And into this void, all sorts of new, sometimes pretty grandiose, ideas about who you are can come rushing in to try and build a new identity. This phenomenon actually has a name, the skandha demons. Now, these are not literal devils. Just think of them as psychological fragments of your old ego that, in a total panic, latch onto these fantastical ideas like, I'm a divine messenger or I have secret knowledge as a new place to hide out. This is where delusion can really take root if you're not careful. So how do you stay grounded through all that? Well, the source gives 3 beautifully practical steps. First, feed that analytical mind, but with high-quality, practical content, not more fantasy stuff. Second, complete the past. Use writing to summarize and basically put to bed your old ways of seeing yourself. And third, and this is probably the most important, remain sober. Actively and consciously dismiss those big, grandiose ideas about yourself. So, after navigating all these potential pitfalls, what's on the other side? If you do this work, what does it actually feel like to live with a loosened grip on this whole concept of self? The result isn't some lightning bolt or a constant state of bliss. Instead, the source describes it as a subtle detoxification, a gradual purification of your moment-to-moment experience, where the poison of ego is slowly filtered out. And what does that detox look like in daily life? Well, you find yourself relying less and less on ego defenses. You start withdrawing from pointless arguments, because really, what is there to defend? There's a growing sense of aloofness, not in an arrogant way, but a quiet, unattached way of being in the world. And maybe most crucially, the sting of life's disappointments just doesn't hit as hard. To bring it all together, this quote from cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker connects this Eastern idea directly to a core Western psychological concept. The ego, this self we build and defend so fiercely, is fundamentally a reaction against the fear of our own non-existence. So if the self is a defense mechanism, what might you discover about reality when you finally gently put down the shield? All right, so let's get right into it. We hear a lot about that big aha moment, right? That flash of spiritual breakthrough. But what happens after? What about the confusing, kind of messy, but totally critical journey that comes next? That's what we're diving into today, that in-between space, the path after the awakening.
First thing you've got to get is that this path is not some straight shot to the top. It's a lot more like this winding river. It's a process. It's this wild thing where it's one of the most profound inner transformations you can possibly go through, and yet, at the same time, it is deeply, fundamentally ordinary.
In this quote right here, from Alchemical Psychology, it just nails it. A spiritual awakening isn't about you becoming some brand new person. It's more like a revelation. You're just uncovering the truth of who you've always been, a truth that's been buried under all these layers of identity and habits we all build up. Now, that revelation, it kicks off the first stage of the journey, which, let's be honest, especially if you're doing this outside of a formal tradition, is often just really, really confusing. We're not talking about a simple little shift in perspective here. This is a seismic event. The source material puts it perfectly. It shakes the very roots of your identity. I mean, everything you thought you were is suddenly up for grabs, and that can be incredibly destabilizing. And all that shaking, that destabilization, it often leads to a really challenging period, a phase known in a lot of traditions as the dark night of the soul.
Now, the thing that makes this state so tough is this core conflict, right at its heart. On one hand, you've had this taste of something incredible, unconditional bliss, nirvana, whatever you want to call it. And then, bam, you're thrust right back into the mundane reality of daily life. The contrast between the two is just jarring. It can be super disheartening. And let's be clear, this isn't just about feeling a little down. It's a true spiritual depression. Your old habits, your old ways of being, they just feel empty because they've been cut loose from what held them up. But a new, solid understanding hasn't clicked into place yet. So you're left in this void. You're just painfully aware of an emptiness you can't quite put your finger on. And you gotta be careful here, because this vulnerable in-between state is definitely not without its risks. There are some very real psychological and spiritual dangers that can pop up along the way. In Buddhist tradition, they actually have a name for these dangers, the skandha mara. The best way to think about it is this. As you start to let go of your old ego, your mind kind of panics and scrambles to create new identities to cling to. These are the temptations, those little voices inside that try to drag you back into the old, comfortable patterns of self. This is also when things can get, well, pretty weird. You can get mystically energized, and it can lead to some strange stuff. I mean, the author of our source material notes that his mechanical watches would just stop working on his wrist. Your intuition can get so sharp it's almost terrifying. It's a time where it's really easy to get unbalanced, and grandiose ideas can slip into full-blown delusions if you're not grounded. So with all this internal chaos and all the external weirdness, the need for stability, for grounding, becomes absolutely critical. The risk of just getting lost in all these experiences is very real. And that brings us to the key piece of wisdom for how to get through this time. And this anchor, this source of stability, is found in a simple but incredibly profound Zen teaching. So that raises the big question, right? In the middle of all this inner chaos, with your identity dissolving and weird things happening all around you, how in the world do you find stability? The answer comes from a famous Zen koan, which is kind of like a paradoxical riddle that points to a deeper truth. It goes like this. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So what does that even mean? It's not telling you to just forget about your spiritual life, not at all. It's telling you to ground it in the ordinary. The path through all that chaos is found in committing to the simple, necessary, everyday stuff. You just keep showing up for your life, for the mundane work that has to get done. So how does something as simple as that commitment actually clear the way forward? How does doing the dishes help, you know? Well, here's the thing. You can't force enlightenment. The source material has this fantastic metaphor for it. Enlightenment is like water flowing downhill. Your job isn't to push the water. Your job is just to remove the obstacles, the attachments, the delusions, the dramas, all the stuff that's blocking its natural flow. The chopping wood part, that's the work of removing those obstacles. And when you make that commitment, you start to see these real, tangible shifts. Just look at this. Before, desire has this super strong grip on you. After, that grip weakens. Anger goes from being this instant reaction to something that's just diminished. Virtue, something you had to consciously try to do, starts to feel natural. And your understanding shifts from being just in your head, intellectual, to something that's deep and intuitive. And what ends up happening is you get so focused on the work itself, on removing those obstacles, that you kind of forget you were even looking for a destination in the first place. The work becomes the destination. Which brings us right back to where we started. The path is this amazing paradox. It's both profound and totally ordinary. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. If the path forward is really found in just committing to simple, ordinary work, what exactly are you clearing the way for?
You ever have one of those moments, a profound insight, maybe a spiritual experience that just completely flips your world upside down and then leaves you thinking, okay, what now? So let's get into that really delicate, often confusing time. What happens right after you get that glimpse of something more? We're going to explore those very first steps on the path.
It's funny how ancient wisdom just nails it sometimes. Lao Tzu's words here, they remind us that every huge journey, and especially the one happening inside you, it doesn't start with some grand leap. It starts with just one single step into the unknown.
So, there you are. You've had the life-changing insight. The curtain's been pulled back for a second. But then what? What actually happens next? This is the big question, right? Because that glimpse, it can feel like a blessing, for sure, but it can also be a huge burden, leading to this feeling of total confusion when you try to just slot back into your ordinary life.
Because that first glimpse, man, it changes everything. It basically confirms this deep suspicion you might have for years, that there's something kind of wrong, or at least incomplete about the way we normally see the world. And that creates this deep internal conflict, a kind of disorientation that is incredibly tough to navigate.
And here's the heart of it. Through that experience, what you realize is that you're living in what's known as samsara. You see that you're kind of a prisoner of your own mind, just caught in this endless loop of conditioned existence. And look, it is not a fun realization to have, but it is an absolutely necessary one.
But with that realization, a new goal starts to take shape. A commitment starts to form. This quiet pull towards moksha, which is the hidden and yes, sometimes perilous path towards liberation. And that becomes your new beacon. It might just be a flicker at first, real subtle, but it's there, and it starts guiding you.
The whole process that follows is a lot like a huge block of ice thawing. For the longest time, it looks like nothing is happening on the surface, but all the real work, the important work, is happening quietly, deep inside. It's this fundamental shift that takes place long before anyone, maybe even you, can see it on the outside.
And this brings us to this incredible idea of Tathāgatagarbha. You can basically think of it as your embryonic Buddha nature. This quiet phase is like a period of gestation. You're nurturing a whole new kind of consciousness, literally reconstructing your entire being around these new goals and ideals.
So let's break that down a bit. First, you have to acknowledge these new goals. Then, you start to consciously nurture that little embryonic nature inside you. And finally, you let this new consciousness grow. And remember, at this point, all of this is a massive internal reconstruction project. It's all happening in your mind.
Months, maybe longer, could pass in this totally internal state. And then comes the next really courageous step. You gradually start to return to your conventional life. It's all about re-engaging with the world, taking care of your daily responsibilities, but now you're doing it from this completely new place of awareness.
And there's this amazing Zen koan that just hits the nail on the head.
Enlightenment doesn't mean you just float away from the world. No way. You still gotta chop the wood, you still gotta fetch the water. The tasks themselves don't change, but your relationship to them, that changes profoundly.
Now, this whole transition, it isn't always smooth. Just like that thawing ice, you can get these sudden fractures. Big parts of your old life might just fall away. And this is where you have to really cultivate some essential virtues. Patience with yourself, compassion for the struggle, and a whole lot of loving kindness for your friends and family who might have no idea what's happening to you. Okay, so all of this quiet struggle, it's all building towards a turning point. After a while, the journey itself begins to shift. What felt like wading through thick mud starts to feel like empowered movement. You start to feel like you're on a clear path forward. You're finally finding your direction.
And this is where we get to this fascinating paradox. Make no mistake, this will be the most challenging, relentless, sometimes painful work you will ever do. And yet, it's also easier than anything you've ever tried before. So how can that be? How can it be both?
The answer is actually really simple, but it's so powerful. It's because for the first time, you have spiritual direction. Every thought, every action now has a beacon guiding it towards liberation. You're not just drifting anymore, you are moving with purpose. And that, well, that changes everything.
You can think of it like this amazing alchemical transition. You move from what's called Nigredo, the blackening, which is like wading through this dark subterranean cave guided only by faith, into Albedo, the whitening. You finally emerge. You feel those first weak rays of sunshine. And at that point, your confidence just soars. You're not just hoping anymore. You are actually journeying in the light. But, and this is so important, getting into the sunlight, that's not the finish line. Nope. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It's the beginning. It's the starting pistol. It marks the dawn of true, conscious, spiritual practice.
So now, bathed in this light of awareness, your whole perspective just shifts. The path keeps going, of course, through more and more refined states of being. But now every single obstacle is a teacher. Every setback becomes an opportunity for growth. You are progressing, always progressing, towards that complete awakening.
I want to leave you with this incredible quote from Vincent van Gogh. He wrote it after a period of just immense discouragement, and it is such a perfect metaphor for this moment. It's about that recommitment, picking up the tool of your life, your practice, your pencil, and just going on with your drawing. Because from that moment, everything is transformed. This is where the real work and, truly, the real joy begins.
You know, we hear so much about the journey to a breakthrough, right? The quest for that big moment of realization. But what happens the morning after? What does the path actually look like when you've supposedly arrived? Okay, let's get into it and explore the often confusing and deeply transformative journey that begins after enlightenment. All right, so picture it. You've had that profound, life-altering experience. The cosmic tumblers click into place. But then, Monday morning rolls around. That initial crystal clarity starts to get a little fuzzy, and you're left standing there asking yourself, so now what? This is the spot where the real work, the true path, so often begins. The great Zen master Shinyu Suzuki really hits the nail on the head here. See, enlightenment isn't about blasting off to another dimension. It's about harmonizing your inner world with the outer one. It's a state of oneness. But here's the thing. Achieving that harmony isn't some single event. It's a whole process of weaving that insight into every single moment of your life. And that process, well, it can get pretty messy. So to really understand this path, after the path, we first have to look under the hood at what fundamentally changes inside the mind. This isn't just about getting a new perspective. We're talking about a deep, structural shift in the very roots of your consciousness. In Buddhist teachings, there's a word for this, sotapanna. It means a stream enterer. The idea is that you've stepped into a current that will inevitably carry you to full awakening. You can't really go back to the old way of seeing things because the very foundation of your mind has been rebuilt from the ground up. So here's how that shift actually plays out. Before this experience, the mind kind of works on a single track. It's driven by one root at a time, either something unwholesome like greed or hatred, or something wholesome like generosity. They can't really coexist. But for the Sotapanna, the wholesome roots, generosity, loving-kindness, and wisdom can all fire up at the same time. It's like your mind just got a massive multi-core processor upgrade. And those old unwholesome roots, they become permanently unstable. And here's the upshot, the really crucial point. This new mental hardware becomes a permanent refuge. It's an internal sanctuary you can always return to, a source of stability and peace that's there no matter how chaotic things get on the outside. But having an internal sanctuary doesn't mean the external journey suddenly gets easy. In fact, for the author of our source material, the immediate aftermath was anything but peaceful. It was a period of profound disorientation, a journey into a wilderness of pure instinct. I mean, can you imagine? Your entire life's purpose has been this spiritual search, and then, boom, it's fulfilled. What do you do the next day? The author describes this time as feeling completely directionless and even distressed, with no goals left to guide him. He was just running on instinct, which was both incredibly challenging and deeply confusing. So in this disoriented state, he just poured all of that energy into his creative work with this almost frantic intensity. And the amount he produced was just staggering. 6 books, not just written and published, in only 4 months. This wasn't about ambition, though. He calls it a kind of therapeutic play. It was his way of creating some structure and routine when his inner world suddenly felt boundless and totally chaotic. And this is just a brilliant, raw description of the experience. He looks back on it himself and uses a clinical term, mania, to describe it. But he's careful to add that it was contained, that it didn't have the usual negative fallout. It just shows how these profound spiritual shifts can look really strange, maybe even alarming from a conventional point of view. So how in the world do you navigate a wilderness like that? Well, the journey calls for a kind of inner alchemy, a process of transforming all that raw, chaotic experience into something valuable. You know, just like the old alchemists tried to turn lead into gold, this inner work is about transmuting the raw material of our own lives. It's about taking the lead, the confusion, the suffering, the attachments, and turning it into the gold of wisdom and compassion. And this alchemical journey seems to unfold in about 3 stages. It kicks off with Nigredo, which is the darkness, that initial phase of confusion you emerge from as a new direction starts to take shape. Then comes Vipassana, or mindfulness, where you start to see these deep truths playing out in the simple, everyday moments of your life. And finally, you reach Albedo. This is where you restore balance by learning to absorb negativity and reflect back wholesomeness, fundamentally changing how you relate to the world. And the result of all this inner work isn't just some neat, philosophical idea. It's a real, tangible, subtle healing. It starts in the mind as you untangle all those old patterns, but eventually it actually starts to manifest in the body as that inner harmony ripples outward. But as you get further down this road, a new and really subtle danger pops up. Right when you think you're getting free, the ego lays its final and maybe its most clever trap. What happens is, the ego sees all this newfound clarity and this ability to heal, and it tries to claim it. It starts spinning these fantastic stories. I am special. I'm becoming a great healer. I'm a prophet. A brand new and maybe even more dangerous spiritual identity starts to form. This is actually known as the Skanda Mara, the demon of aggregates, or the demon of identity. It's the temptation to get attached to this new enlightened self-concept. And according to our source, giving into this fantasy, really embellishing it, can cause an immense amount of harm and can be the downfall of so many promising spiritual journeys. So what's the antidote to this super seductive trap? It's remarkably simple, actually. It's humor. When these grand, epic fantasies about yourself start to arise, the advice is to just laugh. Laugh at yourself and laugh at the beautiful, enchanting story the ego is trying to sell you. And when you can finally laugh at that last trap, that's when you arrive at the great realization. This is the ultimate shift in perspective that the whole entire journey has been leading to. It turns out the goal was never about improving yourself or perfecting yourself or becoming some kind of special, enlightened person. All of that was just another story. The real transformation is this. You realize you aren't the permanent resident of your life story, but you're the observer of it. You're still living in this complicated world, for sure, but you're no longer completely identified with the character you're playing. And in that space, there's a freedom, a deep peace that comes from that one simple shift. And that kind of leaves us with this final thought to sit with. If we're not the character in the story, not the story itself, not even the enlightened one, then what are we? In this continuous, eternal dance of awakening, maybe our true nature isn't some thing to be found at all. Maybe our true nature is simply the dance itself.
All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going on a pretty profound journey, one that's all about transformation, about finding our way out of the dark and into the light. We're looking for the key to the gate.
You know, there's this great Zen proverb that really sets the stage for everything we're going to talk about. It makes you think, right? That maybe, just maybe, the darkness we feel isn't coming from out there, but from a shadow we're casting ourselves. And that's the heart of what we're exploring today, an inward journey to figure out the source of our own shadow.
This image, it just captures that feeling so perfectly. A lot of spiritual traditions call it the dark night of the soul. It's that really deep, isolating time where you just feel completely lost, tired, and full of doubt. You feel like you're just pushing forward totally blind through a world that feels completely empty and hopeless. So, this feeling of being trapped in the dark, it's not just you. It's actually a known stage of transformation. In alchemy, they call it the Nigredo phase. And when you're in it, any faith you had in things getting better feels like a candle that's been snuffed out. You are deep in the gloom, and any idea of spiritual freedom just seems like an impossible dream. And what is that ultimate goal? Well, it's often called moksha, which means spiritual liberation or emancipation. But honestly, when you're stuck in that Nigredo phase, a word like moksha barely even registers. It just feels abstract, way off in the distance, and totally disconnected from the tough reality you're living in. But then, after all that time in the dark, something starts to shift. And here's the crazy part. It's not because anything in the outside world has changed. It's all happening inside. You get to a point where that deep gloom finally starts to lift, and you see the very first glimmers of real, genuine hope. It's like an inner sun is beginning to rise. Now, this awakening isn't like flipping a light switch. It has these 4 really distinct qualities. First off, it's gradual. It happens step by step. Second, it has nothing to do with your job or your relationships or how much money you have. Third, it's totally impervious, meaning the everyday ups and downs of life can't touch it. And finally, and this is the big one, its blossoming is inevitable. Once it starts, there's no stopping it. The way this is described is just beautiful. It's like rays of sunlight reaching the deepest and darkest part of an ancient forest. See, this wisdom isn't something you go out and find. It's something that just blossoms from inside you, lighting up the path forward right from the very source of who you are. And that's it. That's when the inner sun is born. It gives you this incredible new strength and energy. And yeah, old habits and confusing thoughts might pop up again, but they can't put out this light. Once it's lit, the darkness can never, ever get that dark again. So this inner sun, it just keeps getting brighter until it becomes something truly overwhelming. Joy comes back. And I'm not talking about just being content. This can be absolutely rapturous, this incredible wave of relief and wonder. It's like all the evidence is piling up, proving to you that you are, without a doubt, on the right path. This wave of relief can even show up as these spontaneous states of deep meditation, which are known as jhana. You don't even have to try. You just find yourself dropping into these profound moments of peace and clarity, and that just confirms it even more. You're heading in the right direction. And all of this new clarity, it's like you're riding in what's called the Brahma's chariot, and it's powered by these 4 amazing qualities: kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. They stop being things you have to work at, and they just become a natural part of who you are. Okay, but here's a really important twist. This amazing transformation, it's not the end of all your problems. Nope. In fact, it brings on a whole new set of them. You're basically hacking your sense of being. And, well, with any hack, you're probably going to run into a few weird, distracting glitches. Seriously, just think about that for a second. What happens when something that you used to think was totally impossible, something truly unbelievable, suddenly becomes your actual day-to-day reality? It can really mess with your head. So what kind of glitches are we talking about? Well, for one, there's a real risk of your ego getting inflated, where you start identifying with saints or divine figures. There's also the new challenge of dealing with this intense mental restlessness. And really, at the core of it, you're just trying to get your bearings in a new reality that is completely, mind-blowingly different. That mental restlessness actually has a name in Buddhist psychology. It's called udhaka.
And it's a big deal. It's considered the 9th of 10 major obstacles or fetters on the path to full enlightenment. It's that jittery, agitated feeling that comes from understanding existence in this incredible new way. You know, there's a quote that just nails this feeling perfectly. "Buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye." That's exactly it. It's that feeling that your old world, your old way of seeing things, your Kansas, is just gone. It's exciting for sure, but it can also be incredibly disorienting. So, where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us at the end of the beginning. Everything we've talked about, the darkness, that first light, the incredible joy, and even these new challenges, all of that is just the grand finale of the first major phase of this entire journey. And that phase, it has a name: Nigredo. It's that alchemical term for the blackening, the decomposition. It's the tough but absolutely necessary process of breaking down your old self to make room for the new one. And you know what? You've graduated from it. But hey, the path doesn't just stop here. A huge, monumental stage is complete for sure. But a whole new path is stretching out in front of you now, and it's leading toward an even brighter dawn. I think the most crucial thing to take away from all this is to stay humble. We have to remember that we're still just students. Yeah, a massive step has been taken, but we've barely even scratched the surface. And the best part? We're told that each new leg of the journey is even more fantastic than the last. So let's end with this beautiful, perfect line from Dante's Inferno, written right after he finally made it out of the deepest, darkest depths. It just captures that feeling of relief, of hope, and of pure wonder at finally seeing the light again, ready for whatever comes next. Makes you wonder, what stars are waiting for you?